Bonhoeffer is a World War II era movie that purports to be the untold true story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his life. It has a 59% tomato meter review. I believe that the tomato meter is professional reviewers, like professional critics, movie critics. And then has a 92% popcorn meter. I believe that this is just an audience that reviews things a lot, and many of them are verified, like they watch a lot of movies and review a lot of them. I think that's how this website works. So it got 60% basically from professional critics and 92% from an audience. In my personal opinion, I think that the movie gets a 1 out of 10 for historical accuracy because the opening was okay. Is reasonably accurate. And it gets a 6 out of 10 for interesting, just general movie score, maybe a 5 out of 10, because it was an action film, I suppose, a Bonhoeffer movie that was an action film. Listen to me. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pastor in World War II era Germany, and he was one of very few pastors that were opposed to what Hitler was doing on moral grounds. He was an honestly honorable person, deeply honorable. Unfortunately, his legacy has kind of been like twisted and pulled in every direction. Every movement, religious or otherwise, wants to claim him. The movie starts off with Bonhoeffer's early life. It shows him being chased around by his brother, Walter. Shows that he was really close with his family. They loved each other very much. Walter joins the military when Bonhoeffer's very young, Dietrich, and he missed his brother terribly. The movie keeps jumping from time frame to time frame. It starts off with him young, and then it jumps to him in prison. In the movie, it shows him going to Buchenwald. That's his ultimate destination. Buchenwald concentration camp. He arrives, and he looks in the cell, and it says, scrawled on the wall, in 100 years, this will all be over. It's an important detail because that was actually there. That was a phrase that was actually on the wall of the cell. The movie threw in a lot of interesting little details like that I could appreciate. And the beginning of the movie was actually pretty accurate. It was pretty good overall. After showing him arriving at Buchenwald concentration camp, getting into his cell, and having a hard time dealing with being there in the concentration camp, it zips back to his early life, somewhere between 1928 and 1931. He was born in, I believe, 1906, so he was probably between 22 and 26 at this point. FYI, I'm not an authoritative source on this. I'm just doing the best with what I have. If you want more information on the subject, check out my book, Was Hitler an Atheist? I have a whole chapter on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, heavily researched. Or check out Victoria Barnett's book, For the Soul of the People, Eberhard Bethge's biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. There are a lot of sources on this, but you have to be careful which ones you get because, again, people like to distort his legacy for their own purposes. Anyway, it zipped back to his life when he was between 22 and 26 years old, like 1927 and 1931. His dad is a famous psychiatrist. I believe he's the head of neurology and psychology at the Berlin hospital. And he was an extremely influential person, the dad was, and they were filthy rich. So Bonhoeffer goes to New York City for a while to kind of experience culture and things. He was already pretty well known in the church scene. While in New York City, he goes to a seminary there. He meets his friend Frank Fisher. Guy went by Frank. His real name was actually Albert Fisher. They visited Washington, D.C., and they wanted to get a hotel to sleep it off. Frank tells Dietrich to go into the hotel, rent a room, come back out, give him a key, and we'll see how friendly they are. Now remember, this is in the 1930s. Segregation was in full effect, and people did not like black people at this point in America. So Bonhoeffer goes in, gets a hotel room, walks out, gives the key to Frank. Frank walks back in and says, my friend rented a room and invited me to stay. Guy pulls a gun on them both. This isn't a real situation that took place. This is dramatic effect. I understand adapting certain scenes to be more friendly to the screen, to be more friendly to film, but I feel like when you're doing like a historical documentary style movie, you need to not do that, in my opinion. It should have been historical, not fabricated. This is, in my opinion, where the film starts going off the rails a little bit. Actually, what happened was when Frank and Dietrich Bonhoeffer left New York City, where they met, to visit Washington, D.C. for a short time, they went with other friends, and they went to a pretty expensive restaurant, and this restaurant didn't allow Frank in. So they ostentatiously, quote unquote, stood up and left. All of them. That's the real story. There are a bunch of scenes of him hanging out in Harlem, going to traditionally black churches. All of that's accurate. He went to a church on the west side of the park in Harlem. Being as influential and kind of well-known as Bonhoeffer already was at this point, he was invited to speak at white churches when he arrived in America, and he turned them all down. In reality, he helped mend the wounds of racial strife among the black community in Harlem. Even if it's just one person at a time, even if it was for a short while, he helped them, and that's deeply respectable. At this point in the movie, Bonhoeffer returns to Germany. In reality, this happened around 1931. I'm not sure where in the movie they claim that he went, but like what time frame it was when he returned in the movie. Because when he returns, he goes to his dad's house, and he plays jazz on the piano for the first time. He's smitten by jazz, loved it. Nobody in Germany really appreciated jazz the same way. So the scene starts with him playing jazz on a piano, and then they start talking about the Nazis and what's going on. They talk about the takeover of the church and everything else. None of that stuff happened until 1933. He arrived back in America, in reality, in 1931, and all that stuff went down in 1933. And he was there for that whole period of time trying to fight it. So I don't know where the movie placed us in the timeline. It was a very confusing timeline. Anyway, Bonhoeffer attends church services for the first time since arriving back to America in the movie. And at these church services, the head of the church, the head of the Reich Church, Ludwig Müller was his name. He was a self-avowed full-blown Nazi. He's preaching about loving Hitler and all this other stuff, and Bonhoeffer's completely disgusted by it, so he goes out in the hallway. This is all the movie, by the way. We're not talking about reality yet. He goes out in the hallway, and he's followed out by a guy, a bishop, a high-ranking religious official. This bishop will later be revealed to be Martin Niemöller, which was nonsensical in the movie. Niemöller admonished and criticized Bonhoeffer for his unhappiness with what was happening. And he said, the church has a long-standing history of not mixing church and politics. So Bonhoeffer shouldn't be mixing church and politics by opposing Hitler in church.
It has long been our policy that politics and the church should not intersect.
And Bonhoeffer basically says, what do you think has happened? Endorsing Hitler from the lectern is getting involved in politics.
Listen to that applause. They already have.
That is not what happened at all. Martin Niemöller was the one that started fighting hard against not the Nazi cause, not the persecution of Jews, but he started fighting against state involvement in church affairs. They had something called the Aryan Paragraph in law, and Ludwig Müller at this point had kind of taken control of the church. He had won the presidency of the church, thanks to Hitler's meddling in the church elections. And they adopted the Aryan Paragraph from the legal code and implemented it in church code. So basically that meant if you have anybody that's been to a synagogue, a grandparent who's Jewish or whatever, you're considered non-Aryan, and you can't be a minister in the church. You can't be a deacon, a bishop, a pastor, or nothing. It would eventually get more intense and move to you're not allowed to be at the church at all. You have to start your own churches and things, but that was down the line. Anyway, Niemöller saw that happening and was opposed to church intervention. That was the issue. It had nothing to do with hating Jews. Niemöller was all in. He was a Nazi, Niemöller was. He voted for the Nazi Party in 1924, 1928, and 1933. And this movie portrayed Niemöller as admonishing Bonhoeffer for opposing state involvement in the church in the beginning. That did not happen. Niemöller was fighting state involvement in the church from day one. Bonhoeffer assisted Niemöller and did what he could to kind of push it in the right direction, but ultimately Niemöller is the one that started the church split that would eventually become the confessing church, the oppositional, basically, denomination to the Nazi religious movement. Anyway, the movie zips to the next moment in time, which is the Sportspalast incident. I talk about this in my book, too. It's also known as the Sports Palace. It was a big stadium that held 20,000 people. Yes. Oh, right here. I opened my book straight to the page. So the Sportspalast situation, that happened on November 13th, 1933. And the way that it was portrayed in the movie, it showed the guy standing up at on the stage saying, we're going to replace the crosses in our churches with swastikas, and we're going to get rid of the Old Testament and everything else. That's not exactly what happened. There's a guy named Reinhold Krauss. He was the Nazi party leader in Berlin. He wasn't really that influential. And he gave a speech up there in front of 20,000 people in which he criticized the Old Testament and said it was a story about cattle traders and pimps, quote unquote. It was a massive scandal. Everything fell apart. It was ridiculous. And people start criticizing this religious movement, this new, kind of Nazi religious movement, heavily. Also, as I said, the movie portrayed them replacing crosses with swastikas. That happened, but it wasn't a mandate. The denomination of Nazified Christianity was called the German Christian movement. They were the German Christians. They wanted to name themselves the Christian Nationalists, or the Protestant Nationalists, actually, because they excluded Catholicism. But Hitler vetoed the Christian Nationalist or Protestant Nationalist name in favor of German Christians. That's on page 127 of the book, A Church Undone. There's a full-blown theology behind this movement at the time, the German Christian movement. It was called positive Christianity. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But there was no obligation to remove crosses, and a lot of the German Christians kept their crosses. In the next scene of the movie, it shows Bonhoeffer walking through town the next day, and he notices that there are youth groups that are marching along, but they're all wearing Nazi apparel. And he says the youth groups, the church youth groups, have been absorbed by the Hitler Youth. That's accurate. That really did happen. However, Bonhoeffer didn't necessarily say that. I'm not sure if he did or not. I don't know any place where he said any of that. I get adapting it a little bit to kind of fit it to film, because a lot of the information that we have is written in people's diaries. How does exposition work? How do you explain it to the audience if it came out of somebody's diary? You have to have somebody standing there explaining it to other people, usually. That's exposition. So I understand the need to kind of put words on Bonhoeffer's lips that don't necessarily belong there, but it becomes a pattern in this movie, a long-standing pattern, and it's a problem. In fact, I'm going to take it this far. I'm going to say this movie is full-blown Holocaust revisionism. He's disturbed by all of this stuff, obviously. And the very next scene, it shows Bonhoeffer speaking to somebody. Who? I'm not sure. I have no idea who this person was, but they say, "You're going to go to England as a spy."
I'm about to ask you to save the German church.
To save it? We'll have to split it apart.
You will go to England as a spy.
That did not happen. Again, this is another example of the movie making things up completely. We have deviated from reality entirely now. I mean, what year are we even in? I'm not sure what year we're supposed to be in. He got back in 1931. Mueller had won in 1933. So what happened in that 2-year period? And he went to England again in 1933. I think October 1933. Again, I have it in my book. Let me pull it up. October 16th, 1933, Dietrich Bonhoeffer leaves for London, and he won't return until 1935. I haven't even addressed the fact that Dietrich Bonhoeffer left October 16th, 1933 for London, and the Sportspalast incident happened November 13th, 1933. An entire month later, Bonhoeffer was not present for the Sportspalast incident. He felt like he could do more for the religious movement on the outside of Germany, basically, so he fled. In 1935, he returned to Germany because he felt that it was cowardly to stay away. He said he felt that he should be involved and experience the zeitgeist, or the spirit of the times, with his people, with the other Germans, his fellow Germans. So he returned in 1935. The movie portrays Bonhoeffer as leaving in 1933, I guess, after speaking to some random person who I don't know, telling him to go to England to act as a spy. While in England, in the movie, Bonhoeffer started the Confessing Church from England. Again, the Confessing Church was an oppositional religious movement to the Nazified version of Christianity, and it basically built its whole basis, its whole foundation off of the idea that the German Christians were breaking one of the confessions by excluding Jews. A confession is kind of a recited set of beliefs that that kids memorize when they're trying to get confirmed or baptized or whatever. And it's just like, I believe that God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are one. I believe that anybody can come to God through Jesus, so on and so forth. And actually, I have it right here. Bonhoeffer felt that by excluding Jews based on race, the Athanasian Creed, that confession, was being violated. At the end of the Athanasian Creed, it says, quote, "At his coming, all people will arise bodily and give an accounting of their own deeds. Those who have done good will enter eternal life, and those who have done evil will enter eternal fire." End quote. That's what Bonhoeffer and Niemöller and all of the other Confessing Church people, or anybody involved in the Confessing Church, believed. And that was the basis of the Confessing Church. That specific confession right there. Anyway, in the movie, Bonhoeffer started the Confessing Church from England, I think. It's such a confusing timeline in the movie. In reality, Bonhoeffer left for London on October 16th, 1933, stayed there for 2 years, and while he was gone, Niemöller stayed, formed something called the Pastors' Emergency League, which was the predecessor to the Confessing Church. And it was basically a group of pastors who were trying to influence church doctrine, church confessions and laws and things like that. A Swiss theologian named Karl Barth got involved with Niemöller and helped draft a founding document to officially create the Confessing Church. And it happened in Barmen. It's called the Barmen Declaration. Bonhoeffer was not there for that. Niemöller and Karl Barth started the Confessing Church. Really, Niemöller started it. And Bonhoeffer was completely uninvolved. And it took place in Germany. Some things that the movie got wrong. The movie portrays Bonhoeffer meeting up with Pastor George Bell when he exits Germany and enters, like, England. That's accurate. That did happen. He did meet with a guy named George Bell, and he was close friends with him. They worked together. This is where the timeline gets really confusing in the movie. It feels like I'm jumping around a lot. I am following a moment-by-moment breakdown of exactly what happened in the movie. Like, I took notes minute by minute, literally. So if you're confused by this timeline, you're not the only one. We left off in the movie. Bonhoeffer left Germany to go to London, and he started the Confessing Church, right? They included a quote in the movie: "To not speak is to speak. To not act is to act." They showed him speaking those words.
Our silence in the face of evil is itself evil. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act.
Except he never said that. That's fake. It's a fictitious quote from Bonhoeffer. Stephen R. Haynes, a Bonhoeffer expert, wrote a book titled The Battle for Bonhoeffer. And in this book, he talks about Eric Metaxas, who wrote a book called Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Prophet, Martyr, Spy, I think. And it's sold millions of copies, New York Times bestseller, and it's all fictitious nonsense all the way down. The movie wasn't based on Eric Metaxas' book, I understand, but it included a lot of the same garbage, a lot of the same Holocaust revisionism. Anyway, Eric Metaxas, in his book, Bonhoeffer, pastor, prophet, martyr, spy. He made a lot of claims about Bonhoeffer that didn't make sense. Stephen R. Haynes addresses it. He says, quote, "The same carelessness is reflected in some of the quotes that are frequently misattributed to Bonhoeffer. In the flood of sloppy attribution that has engulfed his reception in recent years, Bonhoeffer is repeatedly misidentified as the source of Martin Niemöller's famous lament about the results of complacency. First, they came for the communists, and I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I said nothing because I wasn't a socialist." That was Martin Niemöller that came up with that, and it's been attributed to Bonhoeffer incorrectly. He continues, "As well as the oft-repeated adage that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act." Stephen R. Haynes goes on to say, "This Bonhoeffer quote, which continues to circulate widely, has been traced to two sources, a 1971 book by Robert K. Hudnut and a 1998 article describing an exhibit at the Liberty Museum in Philadelphia, now defunct. From the museum, it somehow migrated to the dust jacket of Eric Metaxas's Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, Spy, 2010, from which it made its way onto innumerable Twitter and Facebook accounts and lists of top 10 best Dietrich Bonhoeffer quotes, not to mention posters, t-shirts, and coffee mugs." So they put a false quote in the movie. They showed him saying that. This bothers me to a degree that I cannot even express. Anyway, so in that moment, it shows him in London, I think. He starts a confessing church. He lays down that famous false quote. And then it zips to Germany and shows him being pulled into a car by some people. And he says, "You can't take me." And then the people say, "We're getting you out of the country. It's too dangerous here." So was he in Germany when that happened? I mean, he met with George Bell. That guy was in London, I thought. The whole thing was super confusing. I have no idea what was happening. All right, so the next scene in the movie, it zips back to the present day, quote unquote, where he's in prison. If you remember, at the beginning of the movie, he was being driven to a concentration camp. Well, he arrives at Buchenwald concentration camp in the movie, and he's sitting in his cell. He has a cellmate now, and that's where it was scrawled on the wall, "In 100 years, this will all be over." We're back there. Suddenly in the movie, Buchenwald is bombed. Bombs are being dropped everywhere. The cells open as a result of the bombing, and Bonhoeffer lets a bunch of other prisoners out when his cell opens, and they all run for the exit. They stop at the front gate and say, "Maybe we shouldn't do this because there are guards that are going to shoot us down if we do." One guy ignores it, runs forward to try to escape, and he's shot down like a dog, sure enough. Somebody pulls out a rifle, points it at him, tells them to get back into their cells in the camp. That whole thing is made up. None of that happened. Here's the reality. Dietrich Bonhoeffer participated in a plan to save 7 Jews. It's called Operation 7. They talk about that in the film later, so we'll get to that in a minute. That is what got him caught originally. So the Gestapo arrests him and brings him to Tegel prison. It was not a concentration camp. They interrogate him, and he pretty expertly convinced them that he was an honest, hardworking Aryan who loved the fatherland and was trying to help and all that other stuff. Eventually, his role in certain subversive activities were uncovered, and he was sent to Buchenwald concentration camp. While in Tegel prison, there was a bombing that took place. In the chaos, it gave him an opportunity to escape his cell. There was no escape attempt, though. There's more to this story. I don't remember it, so I'm not going to talk about it. I don't want to be inaccurate here. That was the reality of what happened. I don't know why they would include that in the movie, that it happened in Buchenwald and that there was an escape attempt. That's fictitious. So the movie shows them basically being sent back to their cells, and then it zips away from present day and back into his, back into the other timeline, whenever this is, sometime between 1933 and 1945. I have no idea where they are now because they're at contradicting moments. They're showing contradicting scenes at this point. It's extremely confusing. So we're back at before he was arrested or anything. The next scene shows Niemöller at some location. I can't really tell what was happening or where they were, but I got the impression from the movie that they were implying that Niemöller was in London with a bunch of seminary students, like 25 people that basically were the only seminary students or the only pastors or clergy of any sort that agreed with Bonhoeffer that the Nazis needed to be stopped. The movie seemed to me implied that Niemöller brought these seminary students to London to be safe and to plan kind of their next attack on Hitler, basically. That never happened. He also apologized to Bonhoeffer at that point. Niemöller did. He said, "I'm sorry for doubting you or chewing you out or any of that other stuff." Again, that didn't happen. None of this stuff happened.
We have smuggled the finest seminary students from all over Germany here. And we have brought them our finest teacher. I'm so glad it's you. No, it's not me, Dietrich, it's you.
In this next scene, it shows Martin Niemöller standing up at his pulpit, his lectern, if you will, and he's preaching. He starts to preach a hard-hitting message, an extremely oppositional message.
But this infestation comes from within, and not by the Jews, who are our spiritual brothers and to whom we owe an unpayable debt, but by those who claim a higher office than the Lord Jesus Christ himself. Go tell your Führer that he's not bigger than God. And for daring to claim his throne, there awaits a punishment beyond his understanding.
In this message that Niemöller was preaching, he defended the Jews, admonished Hitler, said that they should not be worshiping Hitler this way, and he read his famous poem, "First they came for the communists, and I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. Then the socialists, then the trade unionists, then the Jews, and then they came for me, and no one was left to speak for me."
Because when the Nazis first came for the socialists, I didn't speak out, because I was not a socialist. And when they later came for the trade unionists, I didn't speak out, because I am not a unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out. Not soon enough, because I am not a Jew. So when they come to knock at my door, will there be anyone left to speak out for me?
First of all, that's not when he said that. And second, they left off the first sentence. First they came for the communists, but I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. I thought that was an interesting omission. To be fair, Niemöller had different versions of the poem, and he read the communist bit at different points in time. Sometimes he left it off and he just read socialists. Other times he included communists, so I guess I'll forgive that. But none of that happened. That whole sermon that they portrayed in the movie is fake. At no point did he shame Bonhoeffer for defending Jews. At no point did he tell Bonhoeffer to stop trying to prevent the Nazi takeover. At no point did he read his poem from the pulpit in Germany, like between 1933 and 45. At no point did he get up there and defend the Jews. Again, Niemöller was a Nazi. He believed in all the same stuff. In the next scene, Niemöller's having dinner at his house with Dietrich Bonhoeffer. They're discussing Kristallnacht, which is also known as the Night of Broken Glass. It took place on November 1st, 1938. Famously, it was a brutal, violent riot against Jewish-owned businesses, against synagogues, against Jewish homes. Anybody that was in their home, a lot of it was burned down in 1938. It was very ugly, a very ugly situation. So, since they're discussing Kristallnacht, I guess that puts us in 1938. Except that Niemöller was arrested in July of 1937. So again, we've got, contradictory, like I don't know where we are in the timeline. Every time I establish a moment, okay, I know that we're here, they mess it all up. So anyway, he's having dinner with Bonhoeffer, Niemöller is. A car pulls up in the movie, and they see the SS coming in. They walk in, they arrest Niemöller, and they take him to prison, and they arrest Dietrich Bonhoeffer and put him on house arrest, basically, long term. Again, none of that happened. In July 1937, between 1935 and 1937, Niemöller was arrested a lot, in reality. He was arrested, like, multiple times. And it was mostly just detained for, like, a day or two, and then released afterward. They question him, they interrogate him, because he was oppositional to the state's involvement in the church. Finally, they arrest him in July 1937. and they throw him in prison for 7 months with no trial. His trial rolls around, I believe, in March of 1938, and the judge in his trial says, "You've served your time. I sentence you to 7 months." And he released him on time served. That's actually what happened. And then Hitler had him rearrested immediately as his quote-unquote personal prisoner. They sent him to Sachsenhausen concentration camp immediately after the trial, basically March 1938. He stayed there until 1942, at which point he was transferred to Dachau concentration camp, and he stayed there until the end of the war. So he was in prison for a total of 8 years, and his prison sentence started in 1937, July 1937. The reality of it is Bonhoeffer was not there when Niemöller was arrested, actually. However, he showed up after the arrest, but during the search. They were searching Niemöller's house, the SS was. So he goes in and sees what's happening. He tries to kind of slip out the back door, but they caught him, and they sentenced him to house arrest after that. Detained him while they did the search and everything else. So there's that. I guess they're combining multiple things together. Again, don't do that in a historical documentary. Don't do that. You should not be doing that. Either make it accurate or don't make it at all. The next scene in the movie, after he's put on house arrest, shows Bonhoeffer speaking to his brother-in-law, Donani. Donani was a real person, and he was actually arrested with Bonhoeffer eventually. An incredibly good person. Both of them, deeply good people. Cared about what was right, wanted to do the right thing, at great risk to themselves. Donani was, in reality, he was in the Abwehr, which is a German military intelligence gathering group. It was a government office. Anyway, Donani got Bonhoeffer hired on at the Abwehr. The cover was Bonhoeffer was very famous, and he was going to use his ecumenical contacts, his worldwide church contacts, to benefit the German government. He was going to meet up with these very high up influential pastors in the outside world, and he's going to bug them, and he's going to ask them questions, try to gather information on them on Germany's behalf. That was the cover that he had when he worked for the Abwehr. In reality, it was the opposite. It was the other way around. Bonhoeffer was helping the outside world fight Germany by speaking to them, explaining what was going on and everything else. Another thing Bonhoeffer was doing in the Abwehr was helping pastors avoid military conscription. And that, I believe that's like ultimately one of the kind of the nails in his coffin, that they noticed that that was happening. So that's reality. Now, in the movie, Donani is speaking to Bonhoeffer with Bonhoeffer's friend Eberhard Bethge in the room. They're all three in the room together. Eberhard Bethge wrote Bonhoeffer's biography in like 1970 or somewhere in that vicinity and published it. Really good guy, very close to Bonhoeffer, really interesting. In fact, they're so close that they lived together and shared a bank account at one point, Eberhard Bethge and Bonhoeffer. They don't portray that in the movie, but anyway, so this scene shows Donani, Bonhoeffer, Eberhard Bethge together talking about the Abwehr, about joining the Abwehr.
The Nazis plan to imprison or frontline every pastor that won't bow the knee to Hitler.
Yeah.
That's Donani in the movie.
Knee to Hitler.
Yeah, tell me there's something we can do.
There is.
So Bonhoeffer says, "Tell me there's something we can do." Donani says, "There is."
Gentlemen, we have
This is Donani, a picture of him, by the way, from the movie.
Gentlemen, we have devised a plot to assassinate the Führer.
Here I am, Hans. Send me.
Dietrich, you're an avowed pacifist. Will God forgive us if we do this? Will he forgive us if we don't?
That whole thing is fake. Again, none of that happened. That is from the movie, and it's fictitious. This is, by the way, this is a movie poster from the movie. It shows Bonhoeffer holding a gun. Absurd. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pacifist. He hated guns. And it's this is just a testament to how fake this movie really was, that they'd even have a picture of this. Bonhoeffer had no involvement in the assassination attempt against Hitler, the July 20th assassination plot. Not involved in any way, shape, or form. Something that is pointed out in a review of this movie is actually it was the other way around. It was not Eberhard Bethge saying, "But Dietrich, you're an avowed pacifist. How will God forgive you for this?" And Bonhoeffer saying, Will he forgive us if we don't do it? It was actually Bonhoeffer saying, will God forgive me for accepting this? The assassination attempt on July 20th had nothing to do with civilian groups. It was a military coup. Bonhoeffer was not in the military. He was completely uninvolved. He had no way. He didn't have the military contacts necessary to be involved in the first place. However, there were a total of somewhere around 40 attempts on Hitler's life over the years. 20 of them are even worth mentioning because only 20 kind of got a little bit close. And the July 20th, 1944 plot, that was the big one. So Bonhoeffer did grapple with the morality of an assassination attempt, though he was not involved in an assassination attempt. He was likely aware that there were attempts taking place, maybe even aware of up to 5 of them, simply because Donani here on the right was aware of these attempts, and he most likely would discuss them with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, but he was not involved in the planning or anything else. The movie portrays Bonhoeffer as being the chief plotter, the chief planner behind this assassination attempt. So he offers Bonhoeffer the chance to assassinate Hitler, but I'm not even sure like what his role would have been in the movie. Like what did the movie imply he was going to do? He wasn't the guy with the bomb. And they had already kind of planned out this attack. Like, what was Bonhoeffer's role supposed to be? Anyway, in the movie, Bonhoeffer agrees with Donani and says, I will assist in the attempt to assassinate Hitler. And he joins the Abwehr at that point. And it shows Bonhoeffer marching into the Abwehr and, throwing up the salute and saying Heil Hitler and all of that to the leader of the Abwehr, Wilhelm Canaris. Now, Canaris, as it happens, was very opposed to Hitler and was actually involved in assassination attempts, in providing materials and things like that, providing intelligence. And he was also involved in an attempt to save Jews, to get them out of the country multiple times. Canaris was a good guy, a really good guy. And in the end, he was captured and he was tortured to death and never gave a single name, not one. They were driving iron rods under the guy's fingernails, and he didn't give a single name. However, in the movie, he was a bad guy. They portrayed him as like this evil SS Nazi that was out to uncover what Bonhoeffer was up to. That might be the most shameful, egregious Holocaust denial that I saw in the movie. Rewriting Canaris to be a bad guy. That is disgusting and wrong. Unfortunately, Germany is pretty loose with like allowing movies in that have errors, like factual historical errors. They're pretty loose with that. But if it were up to me, this movie would not be allowed in Germany because it is full-blown Holocaust revisionism. The next scene in the movie is about Operation 7. Operation 7 was ultimately the thing that got Donani and Bonhoeffer caught. It took a year to plan. Canaris was involved in the planning with Bonhoeffer and Donani, and the goal was to hire 7 Jews to work for the Abwehr, get them passports and money, and have their names removed from train manifests, send them by train to Switzerland, and then from Switzerland to New York City to safety. There were about 40 members of the Abwehr that were opposed to Hitler and actively working against him. It's commonly referred to as like a den of conspirators, I guess, like a nest of conspirators working against Hitler, but actually the Abwehr was a German intelligence agency. Most people were not oppositional to Hitler in it. Anyway, a number of people from the Abwehr and other groups picked the 7 Jews that would make their way out of the country. Bonhoeffer picked at least one of those people. And the 7 Jews that were involved in Operation 7, they left the country at different times. They didn't all leave together. When the day came, though, they managed to get 14 Jews out total, not just 7. The way that they were caught is they sent money abroad to make it available to these Jews to help them escape, to help them like get out of the country and make their way to New York City and to survive while they're doing it. The German government saw these transactions taking place and thought it was like a money laundering scheme. So they started investigating, and that's when it was all uncovered. Anyway, in the movie, the very next scene in the movie after showing that Canaris was a bad guy is a scene of Donani and Bonhoeffer in a truck driving 7 people to the Swiss border. They stop at the Swiss border, and it appears as though he's bribing the Swiss guards to allow the Jews in, and they have a drink with them and stuff. That's just fictitious. It's all fictitious. Like, none of it happened that way. Okay, so the next scene in the movie shows Bonhoeffer talking to Donani and his other family members about what happens next, because they were tracing the money and they didn't know when they were going to catch it. Basically, Donani said, they're going to find out that we did this, and I want you out of the country before they do. So Bonhoeffer agrees and leaves for New York City once again. And he goes to Abyssinian Baptist Church to hang out with his buddy, Frank Fisher. None of that happened either. Bonhoeffer never saw Frank Fisher again after meeting him that first time in the early 30s, I think, like 30, 31, I believe. The whole thing is made up. And like, again, I don't know where we even are in the timeline. It is so incredibly deeply confusing how this movie laid it all out. Like I said, I can forgive some modification of reality to adapt it to a screen. That's not what this is. So Bonhoeffer ends up in New York City in the movie at this point. Then they show the assassination attempt taking place. Here's the reality of the assassination attempt. A guy named Stauffenberg. He had been promoted, so he had an opportunity to be close to Hitler. He had lost one of his hands in the war, and he lost 2 fingers on the other hand. So he's working with like just a few fingers, basically. He was given 2 briefcase bombs, and he knew that Hitler was going to be in this room at this time. So he shows up to this military compound, basically. Hitler is looking at a map on a big map table. And Stauffenberg's plan was to go to the bathroom, break the pencil fuses on these 2 briefcase bombs, set them down in the room, walk out, they blow up, Hitler's dead. That was the plan. However, it didn't really work out that way. These are pencil fuses. So basically the way it works is you break a little vial and a liquid kind of eats through a membrane, and it takes it 10 minutes or whatever. It's, however much liquid you put in will determine how long it takes to eat through. And when it does, it ignites the bomb and it explodes. So it's like a timed fuse without having a timer. Stauffenberg is in the bathroom at this military compound, fiddling with the pencil fuses, trying to prime the detonators, basically. But having only a few fingers on one hand, it was slow going. And he was called out of the bathroom by one of the people there at the compound. They said, "We need you in this room." So he didn't have time to prime the second detonator. He handed off the other bomb, the second one, and he took the first one, which was primed. And he walked into the room, he set it down, and then he pretended to get a phone call, walks out, it explodes, kills a bunch of people. However, the map table protected Hitler, so he didn't die. That's the reality of what happened in this assassination attempt. Now, let me tell you what happened in the movie. It portrays a guy putting on a vest with, like, sticks of dynamite around it. And he puts the vest on and he puts his jacket over it. And then he puts his hands in his pocket and it seems to, like, crush vials of something in his pockets. Hitler rolls up in a car, steps out of the car, walks up to him, gets close enough that it looks like Hitler's about to kiss him. Says something to him, I don't remember what, and then Hitler gets back in the car and leaves. This guy, Gustav was what they named him in the movie. Why Gustav? No idea. So anyways, this Gustav guy already snapped whatever these detonators were supposed to be in this movie, so he runs to a bathroom, throws the vest into a sink and starts running water on it, because apparently water is like the thing that you have to use to put out these fuses in this fictitious bomb that this fictitious Gustav had. That was the end of the assassination attempt. So what planning was necessary for that? Exactly. Bonhoeffer was not the one to execute it or any of that. So I'm not even sure like what the movie was trying to communicate. Again, Holocaust revisionism. This is a flat out lie. All right, so the next scene shows Bonhoeffer speaking to his friend Frank Fisher in their little seminary place there. And Frank tells Bonhoeffer that he needs to return to Germany. And he agrees, I guess, so he returns to Germany. The next scene is him being caught and arrested and being driven to Buchenwald concentration camp. Now we're up to present day. However, he went to Tegel prison first and he spent months there. So I'm not even sure what the movie was doing or what the writers were up to or whatever. They had little details like, in 100 years this will all be over, scrawled on the wall of the cell. They couldn't have possibly not known that this isn't what happened. It isn't that they didn't research enough to know that fact about the 100 years thing. They must have researched this into the ground. They, in my opinion, intentionally chose to lie about this. And that is Holocaust revisionism, in my personal opinion. Anyway, the next scene, after it shows him like entering Buchenwald or whatever, the next scene is him leaving Buchenwald for an unknown destination. They stop at a house in the movie in Schönberg. They show Bonhoeffer holding a sermon, basically like a service, and he gives all of his fellow prisoners communion there. And then the guards walk him out and hang him right there at that house. Again, not what happened. They also explicitly said that he was hung in Schönberg because he planned the assassination attempt. That is not accurate. Again, he wasn't involved in the assassination planning or attempt or anything. What happened was Canaris was found out. He was arrested, he was tortured and everything, and within a short period of time, the Nazis found Canaris' diaries. And his diaries mentioned what Bonhoeffer was up to, what Donani was up to, mentioned a whole bunch of different people. Hitler sat there personally reading through Canaris' diary and ordered Bonhoeffer and Donani's death. Up to that moment, Hitler was treating Bonhoeffer as a privileged prisoner because he was famous, and he thought, maybe he could use it as a bargaining chip, trade Bonhoeffer for some concessions or something. But when he saw Bonhoeffer's name in Canaris' diaries, he ordered him executed. Donani, Canaris, and Bonhoeffer, all three were executed on the same day, although in different locations. They were not executed all together. So Bonhoeffer was executed because of the assassination attempt. They wouldn't have found Canaris' diaries if the attempt had not taken place. But Bonhoeffer was not involved in the attempt. That's where a lot of people get it confused. That's where, the Christian nationalists always get this mixed up. They think that he was involved. In reality, they did stop at Schönberg, that little house, and he did hold a final service there. He did give them communion and all that stuff. Then they got back on the bus, and they drove to Flossenburg concentration camp, and then Bonhoeffer was executed. He was hung from a rope. When he died, they cremated him immediately after. The end. The movie ended with some bit about supporting Israel or something to that effect. I knew it was going to be bad, but I had higher expectations for it than that, truthfully. I have no idea what the timeline looked like. And you know what bothers me the most about it, probably? The fact that people believe that it's a real documentary. Look at this. The Bonhoeffer movie, with a picture of Dietrich Bonhoeffer holding a gun on the front. Joe Layden says, Dazzler shrewdly portrays Bonhoeffer with carefully calibrated measures of zeal, sincerity, boldness, and, on occasion, terror. Randy Myers says, it's a fascinating but sad story about sacrifice and staying true to your moral beliefs and faith, a potent message that we need to hear time and again. You know another thing that bothers me about this movie? The opening said, the untold true story of Bonhoeffer. No, there was nothing true about this. Literally, I don't think that there was a single scene that was true, that was accurate. Not one. I don't remember seeing anything take place that actually took place the way that it was portrayed. And they also left out some really big, important scenes on top of that. Niemöller was a Nazi, as I said, and he believed that he could talk Hitler into backing off of the church. If he could just sit in a room with him, he could explain to him what was going on and make him see reason, basically. So he schedules a meeting with him. Karl Barth goes with him, another famous, a Swiss theologian, really famous, influential guy. And they're going to meet with Hitler over the course of 2 days. Niemöller shows up to meet with Hitler. He walks into the room, and Göring, Hitler's number 2, walks in behind him carrying a red case, pulls out a paper from this red case, and reads what was on this paper. It was a transcript of a conversation that Niemöller had the night before on his parish phone. They tapped his phones. He had this conversation with a guy named Walter C. Kuneth, I believe. He was a theology professor at a nearby university, I think. And he basically said he's going to give Hitler a letzte Ulang, which effectively means last rites, but it's a pun that could also mean he's going to butter him up. It's because they anoint dying people with oil. So anyway, he said he's going to give him the letzte Ulang. And Göring reads that out to him. Hitler says, "Did that really happen? Did you really say these things?" Niemöller, being a military man, steps forward in military fashion, says, "Sir, I did," and explains himself. He was a U-boat commander in World War I, Niemöller was. And he says, that he just wanted to communicate that he's looking out for the best interests of the Reich by trying to guide the church in this direction. And Hitler yells at him, "You leave the Reich to me and worry about the church." Sends Niemöller away, and it was a massive embarrassment. I thought they were going to show that scene. They didn't. They did not show that scene. They didn't show any major event that took place that I can think of. They mashed stuff together and had a confusing, wild timeline that didn't make any sense at all. I mean, even not knowing anything about World War II or the Kirchenkampf, the church struggle, or Bonhoeffer, I would think that people would be confused as hell by the timeline. It doesn't make any sense. Here you go. Richard Propes. "While I have my quibbles with Bonhoeffer, it's yet another tremendously bold and impactful film from the folks at Angel Studios." What quibbles could this guy possibly have with Bonhoeffer? I don't have any quibbles with Bonhoeffer. He's an honest, good guy as far as I can tell. I mean, he's morally complicated like everybody is. I'm sure he got in fights with his parents, yelled at them, they yelled at him. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that happens. That's part of being a human being, right? But he was a good guy. What quibbles could this guy possibly have? Is he just making things up right now? Roger Catlin, "It plays too dull to be very effective for anyone." Interesting. In that time and place in Germany, it was controversial to be a pacifist. Nobody was a pacifist. Nobody. People were literally committing suicide if they couldn't join the military. Niemöller wrote the German government from a concentration camp requesting the right to join the German Navy from a concentration camp. That's the environment that they were in. And the fact that Bonhoeffer was a pacifist was something that he didn't tell just anybody. He didn't believe in war, basically under any circumstance. And what's more, according to Victoria Barnett, he also refused to create a moral justification for this. He reasoned that basically, if you're in a car, it's about to mow down 100 people, you have an obligation to jerk the wheel, even if it kills you and the person behind the wheel. You saved 100 people. That is a decision that one should make, but he refused to justify it from a biblical perspective, from a religious, theological perspective, or even from a moral one. He was a complete pacifist. All right, take a look at this one. Tim Apollo, love the name. The storyline leapfrogs in time confusingly, but Komarnicki did his homework and packs in plenty of the drama of Bonhoeffer's fascinating and spiritually exemplary life. So I wasn't the only one that found it confusing, I guess. Jenny Kermode, Bonhoeffer struggles with his faith, but less in the manner of a great thinker and more in that of someone who writes quotes for inspirational posters. That's because the movie script was written by people who write quotes for inspirational posters. It was not the words of Bonhoeffer by any stretch of the imagination. It's a fascinating but sad story about sacrifice and staying true to your moral beliefs and faith, a potent message that we need to hear time and again. Feels like an ambitious yet ultimately uneven attempt to capture the life of a complex man. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, and again, it was completely wrong about everything. This tedious and inaccurate biopic of German pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer makes his suffering from Nazi hate look more important than the non-Aryan targets of the same hate. It's a misguided movie that's a hokey and jumbled mess. Absolutely. I could not have said that one better myself. While Hitler may have been seen as God by his subjects, not really, but okay, it looks like Bonhoeffer's own almighty has had the power to trump der Führer, and this film, for the most part, is proof of that. No, this film is proof that propaganda is still all over the place in our culture, and people eat it up hook, line, and sinker. Anyway, tell me what you think about it in the comments, and if you've seen Bonhoeffer, give me your analysis in the comments. I'm really curious. I will be looking at the comments, see what other people have to say. Real Pumpkin J, the bomb was too small due to only having one detonator. The case was moved behind a massive table leg, and Hitler leaned over the very heavy table. Yep, and other people died. Hitler was injured. I believe he popped his shoulder out of its socket, I think. Could be wrong on that one. But he was ultimately okay. They went ahead with the military coup anyway, and it ended badly. They caught a bunch of the conspirators and had them killed slowly, some of whom were killed from behind with piano wire, strangled to death, slowly and painfully. I'm glad I haven't watched the movie. The inaccuracies would have peeved me beyond belief. Oh yes, they definitely did that to me. And Victoria Barnett, she's been quoted in a number of news articles on the subject, on, reviews of the movie and things. Just to kind of glance through some of these, this specific review was sent to me by Victoria Barnett as one that was pretty interesting and good. It's obscene that an anti-fascist martyr's memory is being used to legitimize a movement promising mass deportations, but the American right has long admired Bonhoeffer. Yeah, one could say Bonhoeffer's the patron saint of abortion because they use his willingness to do what was necessary to save lives, to take one life in the course of saving many others. They use that as a justification to basically assassinate abortion doctors. They speak of something called a Bonhoeffer moment, which is supposed to be a moment of complete moral clarity, a societal moment of moral clarity where you know what you have to do. But that's the problem. A Bonhoeffer moment isn't a moment in which everybody knows what they need to do. A Bonhoeffer moment is a moment when everybody is doing the wrong thing, and it's impossible for you to do the right thing. The far right is using this Bonhoeffer moment quote to also justify taking violent action against people if they don't install Trump as like a dictator or something. The final scene in Bonhoeffer, based on historically discredited accounts of the man's death, explicitly invokes the idea of moral purity and extends it vicariously to the viewer. Bonhoeffer stoically marches to the gallows past his fellow prisoners and the SS man whose heart, Grinch-like, grew 3 sizes after meeting the saintly pastor. He stands with the noose around his neck and recites the Beatitudes. When he gets to, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God," the camera cuts to the dappled sunlight shining through the clouds. As in every other scene, this is all text and no subtext. Bonhoeffer is pure of heart, and he has seen God. But the real Bonhoeffer did not feel himself pure at heart. He felt himself an attempted murderer, racked by shame and guilt, a moral failure whose only hope was in God's boundless forgiveness. That his fellow conspirators saw themselves as heroes profoundly disturbed him. "We've been silent witnesses of evil deeds," he wrote in a document circulated among the conspiracy. Yeah, so he worked for the Abwehr, and there were people working against Hitler actively at any given moment. And again, like I said, he knew of most likely 5 different attempts, but he was not involved in the July 20th attempt on Hitler's life. He was not. Oh, and he didn't die because he planned the attempt on Hitler's life. He died as an indirect result of the assassination attempt. It says, "Experience has rendered us suspicious of human beings, and often we have failed to speak to them a true and open word. Unbearable conflicts have worn us down or even made us cynical. Are we still of any use? The film whitewashes the real Bonhoeffer's crushing sense of uselessness, offering instead a Bonhoeffer who promises that violence can make us pure. Like this picture of Bonhoeffer holding a gun. Holding a gun. It could not possibly be more absurd, and it is a complete embarrassment. And it's spitting on this man's legacy to lie about him like this.